Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Donald Trump is working at a supersonic, or in fact, these days we should say hypersonic speed when it comes to laying out his policies and, more importantly, from India's point of view, deciding on his cabinet. So the new Donald Trump cabinet is coming into place. Many of the key positions have been announced. From India's point of view, what matters, first of all, is what is a part of 2+2. We have a 2+2 dialogue that's going on. I presume that will go on, or something like that will go on. 2+2 means the defense and foreign minister from either side meet together on a periodic basis. So the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, in any case, the two most important appointments for India. The third, of course, while 2+2 goes on, there is also 1 and 1, and that is the National Security Advisors, because National Security Advisors work directly with the Chief Executive's office in each country. In India with the Prime Minister's office, and in the US with the White House, with the President of the US. So these are the key appointments strategically for India, and we'll talk about some of those because these have now been announced. Then you have some other interesting ones. For example, the head of CIA. Now, India and the US have had close intelligence cooperation, exchange of information. At the same time, there have lately been strains linked to the Panu affair. So the choice of the new CIA chief is a very important point as well. Also some of the other key positions from India's point of view, again, the trade commissioner or the trade czar. Now, that is not an appointment that's been announced, but generally the name has been tossed around, and that's a name that India is familiar with, because if you look at areas of convergence between India and the US, strategic affairs, foreign affairs, international affairs, there will be many areas of convergence. There will be some tensions, but some of those tensions might be less now, like India's relationship with Russia, because the new Trump administration may be wanting to give Putin some kind of a pass in this situation, and possibly Russia will not be seen as much of an enemy right now with the new Trump administration, at least to begin with, as was the case in the past under the Biden administration, and that may ease things for India. However, the area where there will be tensions, because there are ongoing tensions, and these are not tensions, unlike the Panu issue tensions, these are not tensions that came up in the Biden 4 years. These are tensions which are inherited from the first Trump era. That is the tariffs and trade business, and Trump has talked about this during his election campaign as well. He said that India is the worst abuser of tariffs, etc., etc. So that is the area of tension. Then another area that India will look at very closely, some people think it will be negative for India. I think, however, it may not be so, because that is the immigration area. Now, both the border czar as well as the Homeland Security appointment, those are important for India. We'll talk a little bit about that very briefly. Immigration, since everybody who matters in this government, Donald Trump down, has said that they have no problem with legal immigration for the people that America needs. This also includes legitimate students, I would presume, because nobody has spoken against legitimate students. However, it is illegal immigration that is going to be squashed. At least that is the idea or promise of this government. Now, if this donkey business stops, illegal immigration, then is that a negative for India? I would say it's not a negative for India, because all these poor people, or in some cases not such poor people with some land, some assets, they sell their lands, their tractors, their buffaloes, and pay money to middlemen and to agents to try and get into America through funny routes, risking their life and limb, starving for many days. If that stops, it might actually be a positive for India. Now, I know that this is going to devastate the entire donkey industry in large parts of the country, especially in Punjab and Gujarat, and increasingly in Haryana as well as in some other parts of the country, because this was quite a widespread phenomenon. But I think with these appointments, if the new Trump administration is able to control its borders, which Biden administration has failed to do spectacularly, that will actually be good for India. Maybe a few thousand more Indians will not be able to go and live in camps for 4 years in the US and then get married while their asylum proceedings or whatever proceedings are going on, and produce children, because now children produced like that will also not have American citizenship. That's what Trump administration has said. Now, the important thing about this new Trump administration is, besides the speed at which it's setting up its cabinet, is also the speed at which it's laying out its policies and making them public. And Donald Trump has invented an entirely new product, entirely new communication product. That is just a 3-minute capsule. So he's writing his policy statements, or somebody is writing his policy statements just in the length that he can deliver in 3 minutes. And you will see many of these. So in one of these, he talks about his policies, say, on gender transition surgeries and gender transition treatment. And he says he's going to punish any doctor, any hospital, any pharma company, any school that enables or encourages this among minors in America. So that's a clear statement. Similarly, he's made a clear statement now on downsizing the government, and that's where he's appointed. Those are the other important appointments to look at, or interesting appointments to look at. The DOGE appointments. DOGE, as you know, was something that became famous because there was a Bitcoin named as DOGE, D-O-G-E, or Doge, D-O-G-E, but it had the picture of a dog on it. So as a dog lover, I'd say dog. That is headed by two persons, about 15 years apart. That is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Two of them, one is 53 years old, that's Musk. Vivek Ramaswamy, 39 years old, who was also a very audacious claimant for the Republican Party nomination for presidential elections and contested quite hard. These two, it's a joint leadership. These two have been set up to lead a commission to downsize the government, to cut waste in the government, and to cut down the US budget spending, which now is $6.75 trillion. That's almost twice as much as India's GDP. So they want to cut that and reduce the debt on America. Now, American right has always had the promise of giving you minimum government. Everybody says, particularly people on the right, everybody says minimum government, maximum governance. But you know what happens? When they come into power, then all they end up doing is expanding the size of the government. How that works in America in particular, whether on the Republican side or Democratic side, please check out in Ruchir Sharma's book, which talks about what's wrong with capitalism. And he says exactly this, that every president has actually ended up expanding the US government and regulators and other agencies and bureaucracies. In fact, that's what he said about the last Trump administration also. This one is promising to be different. Also, if you see his cabinet choices, they are quite young. So while Trump himself is not quite young, he's 78 years old. Secretary of Defense, most interesting appointment, Peter Hegseth, 44. Mike Waltz, his National Security Advisor, 50. His Homeland Security czar, Kristi Noem, 52. The new CIA chief, John Ratcliffe, who in the past has been the Director of National Intelligence, 59. His ambassador to the UN, Elise Stefanik, who you saw quite a bit of during those hearings with the presidents of American campuses where Gaza protests were being carried out, and who effectively fired on camera. In fact, she basically asked the presidents of Harvard and Pennsylvania universities to resign. Both of them ended up resigning shortly afterwards. So she is just 40. So this is a very young cabinet. There are a couple of people who might be older, but they also don't cross the 60s. So Tom Homan, the border security czar, very important. He's the one who's supposed to carry out these millions of deportations as Trump and his people have been promising. He is 62. Also, among the older ones is the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, who's worked with Trump for a long time. She's helped him shepherd his campaign in the past and now in this campaign as well. She's 67, and then maybe of all the appointments announced so far, the oldest is his choice of the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee, interestingly, the former Arkansas governor, he is a former Southern Baptist pastor, very devout, at the same time, very pro-Israel, so pro-Israel that even Netanyahu would find himself to be a little bit to the center of him, because he does not even describe the West Bank as West Bank. He uses for the West Bank the term that the Israeli right-wingers and Israeli fundamentalists use, which is Judea and Samaria, which is the sort of a biblical name for that region. And he is somebody who's quite happy with, who's actually been talking about Israel needing to annex these regions. In the past, he's even said that he wants to buy a house in Israel as a second home. So he goes there as Trump's ambassador. Remember, Trump it is the only major country in the world that endorsed Israel's annexation of Golan Heights. The last time he was president. Also, Trump moved America's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. So there, Huckabee's appointment is a very important signal. Now see the key appointments as far as we in India are concerned. So first of all, Marco Rubio. Now, I have to be very clear, he hasn't yet been announced, right? Now, the papers that matter, the big papers in America, they've mentioned his name, but right now, everybody's credibility is being questioned, and who knows, tomorrow it turns out wrong. So wait for the formal announcement, but right now, the wide presumption is that this is Marco Rubio. If there's a UPSC exam tomorrow, don't say, and they ask you who's the new Secretary of State appointee, don't say it's Marco Rubio and that Shekhar Gupta told me, right? Because that formal announcement is yet to be made. However, Marco Rubio is the name that's being discussed and mentioned as the new Secretary of State. 53, three-term Florida Senator. He'll also be the first Latino Secretary of State in America. Also, former presidential hopeful who sparred with Trump quite colorfully the last time. He called Trump on stage in Trump's presence a con artist, and he said if Trump had not inherited $200 million from his father, he'd be selling watches in Manhattan. Now, if you've been to Manhattan, a lot of people make their living just as they sell shish kebab or hot dogs. They also sell watches. In many cases, these are fake watches with fancy brands. So he called him that. Whereas Donald Trump returned the compliment in his own way, calling him Little Marco and saying he was so incompetent and so lazy, he would not even appoint him as CEO for one of his small companies. In one of these arguments on stage, Rubio even made references to some part of Donald Trump's anatomy, saying that look at his hands. His hands are so small, and you know what happens with people whose hands are small. And Donald Trump that replies saying, "Look at my hands." He thinks my hands are small, right? They can hit a golf ball 285 meters away. And if the reference is to something else, the size of something else, I tell you there is no problem there. So they've had arguments like that in public, on public stage. Now, this is politics. In politics, you say all kinds of things. And in American politics, unlike say in our politics, there is a lot of tough competition in the primaries for the party's own nomination. But once somebody gets nominated, then everybody gets together, and many of the people who might have stood against you then become part of your government. We saw that happening last time with Biden administration, because Kamala Harris had tried the last time for presidential nomination as well at the primary stage. So that stuff goes on in America. That's not such a big deal. Now, Rubio has always stood for very strong ties with India. Very strong ties with India. He in fact moved in the Senate a US-India Defense Cooperation Act, which wanted to put India in the same category as America's key allies, Japan and Israel, for technology transfers. He also wanted to ban security assistance to Pakistan, even follow-up security assistance if there was any news of Pakistan backing any terrorism against India. So if that appointment goes through, right, if all the I won't say rumors now, if all the informed speculation is correct or informed news is correct, then it will be a positive for India. That is one part of the 2+2. The second part of 2+2 is the most interesting appointment. That is Peter Hegseth. Peter Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, at the age of 44. At the age of 44, somebody barely becomes a brigadier in the army. In the Indian army, I don't think other armies are many different. Now, Peter Hegseth is a veteran. He served in Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So in his period, all three places where the US Army was deployed, although he was in the National Guard, he was in the Minnesota National Guard, rose to be a major, but kept his notes and wrote a lot about it. So he became one of those old-fashioned, very right-wing, very militaristic veterans. And since then has promoted that cause and has stood for that cause. So he's written a bunch of books. Right now his claim to fame was he was an anchor on Fox News, particularly the chief anchor of Fox and Friends, a weekend show on which he featured Donald Trump many times. He also became famous towards the end of Donald Trump's first presidency when he lobbied very strongly on his shows and also on social media, and formally also writing to Donald Trump to get presidential pardon for 3 American soldiers who had been convicted for human rights abuses in Afghanistan and Iraq, and finally got those pardons as well. Now, his views, if you want to understand his views, check out a book called War on Warriors, Behind the Betrayal of the Men Who Keep Us Free. So this is really speaking for American military, and also suggesting that the current military leadership was too much into wokeness, too much political correctness. There are videos on him. I'll share a link with you of one of his interviews where he says all these generals are scared. What will I say? Will I step on something? Will I get somebody's identity wrong? Will I use a wrong word? So that is not the way generals are supposed to function. He's not illiterate. He's 44. He's got 4 big books behind him. In fact, this particular book, The War on Warriors, was a New York Times bestseller on best. He has a bachelor's degree from Princeton and a master's from Harvard. Harvard also from Kennedy School, no less. And in fact, on TV, on camera, he once made a big show of crossing out his Harvard degree and saying, I reject it, I don't want it. And people said, oh, so what? Even if you crossed it, you still have it. So I think he then said that he's going to send it back, because he's been saying that American academic system is now producing young people who don't know the right values. Again, it's an attack on wokeness, and it's no surprise that at the same time, the latest video I see from Trump, a 3-minute video, is about his setting up an American academy. And this American academy will teach American values or education according to American values, no wokeness, no this, no that, no critical theory. So in fact, one of the things that Peter Hegseth attacks is the teaching of critical theory. And he says this has confused everybody among the new generations of Americans, because this has taught us to hate ourselves. This has taught us to hate America. So Donald Trump on cue has announced the setting up of this American Academy, which he says will give these courses for free to anybody. And he also says that all those who've done a certain number of credits at American colleges but not got a degree, they can enroll, they will get credit for those courses, and they can get more credits through his American Academy and get college degrees. So in fact, he says in that 3-minute video that about 40 million, that's 4 crore Americans could now they have a route to college degrees without having to pay what he calls as exorbitant or extortionate fees for them. So you can see ideology is very mixed with the formation of this cabinet, as you would expect with the change in government, but much more than was the case the last time. In fact, if you watch that Hegseth video, he says that for 10, 12, 15 years, Pentagon has been holding war games, perfect war games, perfect in the sense that in each one of those, we always lose. America always loses. These are war games of America going to war with the Chinese. And he says in each one of those war games, America always loses. And he says that's because of the way our military-industrial complex, our bureaucracy, our acquisition procurement process works. Think about India in this case. How that works is that we are always 10 minutes late fighting the last war. And then he brings in a former Republican Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld from Bush administration. And he says, as Rumsfeld said, we'll fight with the army we have. And does it have to be like that? Then he says more rude things. He says, the Chinese have got us by the BA.S economically. I shall not use the word since families watch this, but you know what I'm talking about because he's talking about that. The Chinese have got us by the B's economically, and now they want to control microchips. The reason they want to take over Taiwan is that they want to control all microchips. We can't even drive a car now without Chinese microchips in them. That is why they want Taiwan. And he says the Chinese are taking a full spectrum long-term view of global domination, whereas we have our heads up our asses. So at least this one I will not dotify. I will use the exact word. And he says, in this situation, we can't have our generals who are walking on eggshells, and I'm going to change that. He also says that look at the Chinese. The entire Chinese plan is to fight a war with America and to defeat America, while we are 10 years behind fighting our last war in terms of our preparations. And he says the Chinese are working on these hypersonic missiles. You can stop some, but he says all our defense is built around our big aircraft carriers. Now, if 15 of these missiles can take down 10 of our carriers in the first 20 minutes of a war, then that war is over. So America has to do something to plan to counter this. So you can see that this US administration is going to have a very different view of its defense and defense planning, and is going to be very China focused. And it's in that China focus and also India's interest that I bring in another key appointment. So Mike Waltz is going to be the National Security Advisor. Again, a very young man. Mike Waltz, 50, is the new National Security Advisor. Also a former colonel in the army, in fact, Green Berets no less, the US Special Forces, US Army Special Forces. He headed the India caucus on the Hill. So underline that. He headed the India caucus. He also led a congressional delegation to India for the 15th of August speech, the Prime Minister's speech at the Red Fort event. He's a big supporter of India, and he sees India as critical to balancing China. And then there are others. I told you that one name which might surface again, although that is something which is floating again, not formally announced, that is the new trade czar. And it's once again Robert Lighthizer, who Piyush Goyal on our side knows well because they were the ones holding negotiations the last time. So I think they'll pick up the thread from where they left it. But this time, Lighthizer and Trump administration are going to be a lot more demanding in those negotiations. So I think just a week after the American presidential election result, or at least since the results became clear, this much detail is a lot of detail. So watch this space, more will happen. And the interesting thing is, this time, Trump administration will be unveiling their policies very rapidly with these tiny Trump videos. So keep an eye out on those Trump videos. Also, they're planning a lot of change, particularly this big shakeout in the bureaucracy. Those things are never easy to do. In fact, I was watching that Trump video on the shakeout in the bureaucracy, and just like this, you know how artificial intelligence works. Automatically on Twitter, the next video that surfaced was from Yes Minister, where the minister is saying we are going to clean up all this mess and all this bureaucracy, and the chief bureaucrat there says clean sweep, and the minister says yes, clean sweep. Wonderful line. So we'll need to watch this very carefully, because it's easy to say that you're going to cut down the size of a government, but usually you end up adding to the government. The only good thing is that in this case, this Dog Commission is not set up inside the government. So it's not as if one more government department will come up or one more bhavan will come up, as in Delhi. So many new bhavans have come up as we've been trying to build minimum government for 10 years. This is sitting outside of the government.